Hello, tonight we're working on Chapter 2, and we have a bunch of different things to learn here, including we are going to get to the point where we're actually working hands-on within Visual Studio, but there's some conceptual things that we're going to talk about before we get to that point. And the one thing I do want to remind you guys is that, you know, the book will always remind you that you can go to the Planet Rocks website, and you guys are going to learn Planet Rocks, right? W-R-O-X, and always get the code that you're about to work on that's already done for you. You don't have to type this stuff in. And in fact, when we get to the point of like looking at code in the book that needs to be typed in, there's really no reason to type it unless you really want to go through the manual process and you're a quick typist. I will often recommend to you that you just grab the PDF version of the book from the course shell or the source code from the website and unzip it and pull in your code that way. Whatever works better for you, that's on you. But he will go through the process of explaining that. Now, one thing that the author does right off the bat is he starts talking about things you should probably know before you read this book and take this class. So they're kind of making an assumption as you're coming in that you may have done a little HTML, but maybe not. Maybe you've got a job where they just throw you right into ASP.NET, right, John? Before you even learn it formally. And that happens. But it does help if you know your HTML, your CSS, and JavaScript, at least on a rudimentary level, so that when we're talking about things, you have some sort of a basis of comparison from which to work. The .NET environment and working with ASP scripting, and then working with C# as a programming language, you're going to see that we're going to combine like at least 4 or 5 or 6 or sometimes more technologies all on the same page. So all these different codes kind of like mixed together. It's not unusual. That's just how the world works. So knowing a little bit of those things can help you. Having worked with Visual Studio before can also help you quite a bit. But I know for some of you, it's not the case. In the old days, you'd go into the web program, and one of the first things you would do, one of the first courses you would take, is Intro to Programming and Database. And some of you may have done that course. And in that class, you learn how to pseudocode. Then you learn Visual Studio. You learn how to create like console applications, Windows applications, and work with databases. And then, not that you're an expert at that point, but you have a good grasp of the tool at least. Some of you now that are taking the newer web degree, we eliminated that course. So when you get to this class, it will be the first time you touch it, and that could be the case. The first time you're installing Visual Studio, the first time you're using it. And please understand that feeling a little overwhelmed by it is perfectly normal. I've been working with it for years, and I still feel overwhelmed by it because it's that kind of a tool. It's that powerful and flexible. Okay, but it doesn't mean it's not learnable. The nice thing about it being the #1 IDE out there is there's so much material, both from Microsoft, from private publishers, people on the web. Heck, just go to YouTube, type something in. Somebody's got a video out there about it. So keep that in your mind. We are not using 2012, obviously. We are going to be using Visual Studio 2017. And, the #1 question I've had in these first 2 weeks is like, oh my God, nothing looks the same on my screen like it does in the book. And I think between the 2 classes, and most of you, or a good portion of you, are in both of my classes that are using Visual Studio, we've kind of struggled through these issues enough where by next week you guys are going to be experts and you can be teaching other people, hopefully, at least how to install it and what template to choose. And just so you know, once we get into the rhythm of working on this stuff, you guys will know where to go. And really, because we're working with .NET, the templates that we choose in this class are a little bit different than the Web 2 class, where the Web 2 templates are like gone or renamed or in different spots. But with .NET, the stuff is still pretty much in the same place. So it's not as much of a freak out for you. All right, so there's different project types that we can choose when we're creating these applications. We've already discovered that in the 2017 version, depending on the tools you have installed, you're not going to necessarily see new website in the menu. But it doesn't mean you're not still creating the same thing. All right, so just keep that in mind. There's different project types because there's different frameworks. Now I'm looking at those of you that were with me in the Ruby on Rails class. Is that everybody here except for Alex and Jason and Colleen online? Like in that class, right, we learned Ruby on Rails and we learned what MVC is, right, Model View Controller, as an architecture for developing applications. Well, guess what? A real big thing in ASP.NET when you get to higher levels of it is MVC authoring. In fact, it's really kind of the preferred way if you're building a real big application. Now, I'll tell you what, that's learned in ASP.NET too. We're learning the foundation material so that when we get there, we can roll. But conceptually, it is the same. So choosing the right project type is pretty important. So one of the things that we're going to do here, and you can see that the author's got this screenshot, and the template in the far left side says Visual Basic. And when this book was written, frankly, Visual Basic was a little bit more prevalent than C# was. But this book does both. So we will be working with C#, and that's a conscious choice on our part in the program, because when you go out in the field these days, C# is the language that everybody's pushing. That's the language that Microsoft's pushing. It's not that Visual Basic is no good. It's just that this is what they prefer. Simple as that. So one of the project types that we'll probably select most often is that very first one. When we get to .NET 2, the second course, we will be exploring some of the other project types, but probably focusing most heavily on MVC. One thing I also want you to be acutely aware of as you're working with this is because we're working with basically what we call project templates, we're really pulling in collections of resources. So when we pull in these resources, it's not just one resource, right? And if you look at the top of this dialog box, right up above the selection, it says .NET Framework 4.5. That's kind of interesting, because with Visual Studio 2017, I think the default .NET Framework is like 4.61 or 4.62 or something like that. And there's different tools available and different templates available with the framework. So if you really want to match up, one thing that can help you match up is by switching that framework setting. All right, and we'll see that in just a little bit when we actually start to do it. All right, what's the difference between the different types of sites? Without getting into too much detail up front, they all kind of do different things. Some of them we saw last week when we chose a web form site. Do you guys remember that? It kind of built out the whole site for us. It had like a login thing, it had like menu structure and really cool looking bootstrap, and which is fantastic if you want a head start. And then you can choose the empty one, which basically doesn't have anything in it. Right? It just depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to build. There are reasons to choose the different ones given different scenarios. Notice that we have this other one with Razor. And Razor, guess what, is another language that's used inside of ASP.NET. It's got its own syntax. Usually it's preceded by an @ sign, and it has these special, what we call Razor directives that we throw in. And that's kind of interesting technology. That's something that we'll also learn in .NET 2. We might see a little smattering of it in here, but it'll maybe be like 1 or 2 lines of code that's automatically generated, nothing that we're really, coding from scratch. All right. Now, Windows has had this little thing, Windows Communication Foundation Services, for quite a while. That's not something we really focus on a lot because I don't see it used a lot out in the field anymore. But it is still out there. One of the reasons why you see so many different project templates, folks, is because a lot of times when you go out into the field, you're dealing with legacy things that are already built, and your job usually as a beginner is to make adjustments or corrections. Or if you really get something challenging, converting it to something more modern. That's even more of a challenge. And actually, I think it's kind of fun. And, I think as professionals in the field, you guys, I'm hoping will get to the point where you start craving those kind of challenges. Because at first, when you're learning it, and you're going, oh my God, I don't even get what I'm doing, I'm freaking out, all that kind of stuff. And that's a perfectly normal feeling. But when you get out into the workplace and you get a challenge and you solve it, oh my God, you feel empowered, you know? Say, hey, I did this really difficult thing and I made it work. And now I kind of even understand it a little bit and I can do it again. And then you start to look, as an IT person, you start looking for those things like, what's the next challenge? I'd like to figure that out. That'd be really cool. And that's really the mindset I want you guys to kind of develop going out into the workplace, is to crave that feeling. Because, you know, I've heard from people who play golf, it's kind of like when, you know, like you tee off and you get it right down the fairway and you get it on the green in like one attempt. There's like, it's a satisfaction thing, you know, so, yeah. Like we've all hit a hole in one, right, Jason? Yeah, in mini golf I've done it. But usually in mini golf they have a little channel that you can, if you hit it the right way, it goes right in, right? All right, another little tidbit here. We're actually going to start getting into like doing stuff. The first try it out exercise is coming up. But the author does something that a lot of programming authors do. And they tell you to create a folder on your machine to store your files. Now, notice where the location of it is. I have it highlighted in yellow. They're asking you to go to the root of the C drive and call it beginning asp.net/site, and then put all your sites in there. Do you know why they do that? Because otherwise, where do files normally store on your machine? Your documents folder. Do you know what the path is to your documents folder?
User/documents/
yeah, whatever, right? It's like, and the thing is, it's different for every machine, right? So the reason they do that is they put it always in the root, because that way they can tell you to go to this spot and it will always work. Now, I don't do that. I'm going to tell you that right now. I still put it, and actually I don't even put it on my main drive. I put it on my D drive or my Google Drive. So mine goes in my Google Drive. So let's start by doing a little bit of file management up front to prepare for this. All right? So wherever you choose to store your stuff, that's on you. If you're always using this machine to do all of your work for this class, dropping in your documents folder is fine. Or follow the author's convention and put it right in the root. If you're like me and you bop from machine to machine, I put the stuff in my Google Drive because I can pull it up on any device. So I have the Google Drive software loaded up in my system tray down here. I know you guys have heard this speech probably a dozen times before. I don't mean to belittle you, but I always remember that I have onliners too that maybe haven't heard this, you know, standard lecture or whatever. But I load up the Google Drive software you can download from Google. It runs memory resident. It creates a folder on my machine. If you look actually where I have it, it's actually on my D drive. So this machine actually has two hard drives. I have the primary drive, second drive. They're both SSDs. But I put my Google Drive over there because that way I don't have to worry about disk space as much. And I create a folder for the class. So this is 152178. And then I go ahead and create the folder that he's talking about that matches up. So beginning asp.net. And then you can see if I go in here, well, boy, I have a whole bunch of site folders, don't I? And you guys notice what my convention is if you look at all the file name, folder names in here. What I do is every time I'm working, I do all my work in the site folder. That's like the working copy. But every time I get to a significant step, this sounds like Ruby on Rails, right, folks? Every time I get to a significant step or complete a chapter, I stop, and then I make a copy of the folder. I'm versioning my work. So no matter what happens, if I start working on this chapter and I have the previous chapter saved, I can go back to it if I totally screw things up. I'm going to tell you what, you will at some point totally screw things up. It just happens, right? So you create a safety net for yourself. So what I'm going to do here is you guys can watch me do it. It's a whole lot of fun. I have an old stuff folder, right? Well, I'm going to create another folder called old stuff too. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it spring 2017 because that's really when it's from. And then I'm going to take all the stuff in here, and I could actually, no. What did I just do? You know what? You can Control Z it. Did you guys know that? Any file manager? So I'm actually going to do a Control A to select everything. I don't want that folder in there. No, actually I do want the copies. I don't want the folder that I just made. Okay, I guess that.
You don't want the copy that you didn't make.
Yeah, that's what I undid is I deleted it. So I got spring 2017 and just about everything except for this and the folder itself is going to go in there. So I'm just going to drag and drop everything into my spring 2017 folder and just kind of clean it out. But what I'm hoping that you guys do is find a logical spot to store things, create a folder called beginasp.net or whatever you want to call it, I don't care, and then create a folder for your site. He's calling it site, I'm calling it site. Okay? So work is done. All right, so inside that folder I still need to create a folder called site. That's where my work is going to exist. When I get to a significant step, and probably at the very least at the end of the night tonight, I'm going to make a copy of that folder so I have a version I can step back to. And I'm going to use verbose naming of that folder so I know exactly what's in it. I don't have to guess. Right? So I'll say chapter 2 up through exercise 5, page 87, kind of working or complete or oh my God, help, something like that. Right, got to have a sense of humor about it too. All right, so once you have your folder created, now we can begin to do our work. And really the file management piece, folks, is really important. I know that most of you guys are basically upper level classmen at this point, so you know how to hopefully manage files, but I always feel obliged to tell people because I do find people that really don't know how to manage files. And I'm going to tell you what, in computing, that's as important as like reading and writing as to life. You got to know where your files are. And unfortunately our modern operating systems, Mac OS and the Windows OS now really kind of mask that from us in a lot of ways. The other thing that I'm going to really strongly suggest that you do is if you are running Windows 8 or 10, which I assume most of you guys are, your file window might not show that ribbon bar, the one that I just hid, but I want you to turn that on. If you look right here, there's this little drop down arrow. Make sure you expand that so you can see that ribbon bar. And once you have that there, you'll always want it there, just my piece of advice to you. And then you want to switch over to your View tab, and then I want you to make sure, like all IT professionals, you should always be looking at your file extensions, folks. Because the last thing you want is a file that's got redundant file extensions, or like you probably learned in Web 1, index.html.text. That's not the same as index.html, right? And that kind of thing happens when you hide your file extensions. You can also, if you're working on a Mac, looking at my Mac people, you can also make file extensions visible on a Mac as well. You just go, you go into the Finder and there's an option somewhere. I don't have a Mac to demonstrate, but that is possible. You can Google it and find it. And I recommend it there too. A lot of Mac users don't like that, but I think you should turn it on personally. Why hide the file extension? Yep. I'm cautious about turning on hidden folders too, and I'll tell you why, because sometimes you copy stuff, when you copy and paste a folder, you don't really want the hidden folders. I don't necessarily want the index database, that kind of thing. Or maybe I do. My recommendation is that file extensions are on. You want... That's up to you. Hidden items is on you. You can see I have mine turned on, but that's me. Okay, let's go back to the content. And now we're at the first try it out exercise. And you guys already know this, I think, by reading your assignments in the course shell, but basically our assignments are completing these. All of these in every chapter. Some chapters go quick. Some chapters are pretty lengthy, and we'll find that on some nights we'll go all the way through a chapter and then another chapter, and on other nights we might be working on the same chapter for 2 weeks. My plan is to step through each chapter, and it's not that you can't figure out how to do this on your own. That's not the point. And some of you have already come in here with the work finished, and I get that. But it's all the little explanation that goes with it, and all the little ahas. And the way that this author tends to write things is in one example, he'll have you type it in. The next example, he'll have you right-click. The next example, he'll have you go to the menu, all to do the same task, right? And it's not because you can't figure it out, but just to show you can do it different ways, right? And then keeping in mind our version differences. So you guys ready? All right, here we go. If you haven't launched your Visual Studio, you might want to do it now. All right, so I have it up on screen. And I think we already completed the first step. It says start by creating a folder. You guys already did that? We're all good? And then we're all set. Now, you know, it's funny because that last sentence in step 1, I have had students, basically students that were really ambitious, that when we were teaching Visual Basic, they also wanted to learn C#, so they did it in both. That's totally fine. Now, I want you to work in C# for all your projects. If you want to experiment with VB, that's on you. All right. So, step 2, here's where we find our first major difference right off the bat, right? So I'm going to bring up the book, excuse me, not the book, the software, and I'm going to actually close my start page. That's kind of a thing I kind of do habitually. And really, I tell students the only time I really use that screen is if, like, whatever project I was working on and I'm going back to, if I see it like in the first couple things here, I click on it there and bring it back up. Otherwise, I really don't like the interface much. I just prefer to get rid of it. The other thing I want you to do before you begin is go to this Tools menu and choose Import Export Settings. And I know the author does this at some point, but I want you to start out at the same spot with me so we're looking at the same thing. So click that menu option, Import Export Settings. Select the bottom setting, Reset All Settings. If you want to save your current settings, you have a custom configuration, go for it. My recommendation is just click No, because I'm guessing most of you don't. And then we get to the last screen, which is really where I want you to make probably the most important selection, which is make sure that you are in web development mode. Not code only, but web development mode. It creates a different set of layouts with the tools on the screen when you're working. So if you ever end up like on a Visual Studio and you don't see the stuff that you want, you can go to this dialog and switch it and go to the mode that you need. And then depending on what language you're working with, you can see they provide different tools. And I think it's fascinating now that they have one just for JavaScript. That's a fairly new addition. All right, so choose Web Development and click Finish. And then click Close. Now I was already in that mode, but you notice it did get rid of the output window at the bottom, right? All right. Back to the book. So they want us to do File, New Website, New Website. It says depending on the version of Visual Studio. Now, I'm kind of moving ahead here, and I'm looking at the fact that that will take us to an interface where he's selecting Visual Basic, we will select C#, but basically he's building an ASP.NET empty website. So really, when we do a new project type, because that's what we're going to choose, that's what we're looking for. Okay? So let's go back to Visual Studio and try to make that selection here. So File, New, and I'm very curious. Everybody's running 2017? Does anybody have new website listed here?
No.
Okay, good. Because if somebody did, then I'm like, how did you do that? I want that. Right. All right, so nobody does. So we're going to choose Project. We're going to make sure that we have Visual C# expanded. From there, we're going to choose Web and expand that, and then choose Website. All right. And now, I'm really curious because I do have a Mac person in the room. And I got one email today from a Mac person.
I gave up using Visual Studio for Mac. I'm running out of email.
Okay. And that's what I was asking. So the Mac interface is that much different that you went to running Windows through a VM to do the work. Okay.
Yeah, you can't find half this stuff. That's
Okay. So I didn't know how to advise the student because I had hoped to install it on my little MacBook and I didn't. But that's good to know. And the other thing is, for those of you that might be working on a Mac and might be struggling with the screens that you're seeing, is the other option is to work through the VDI. All of you have VDI accounts now created. I put in a request earlier in the week, so everybody in all of my classes can log in to the VDI. If you want to know how to do that, I'm just going to jump out of this really quick. You can go to your course shell. And then on the resources page, I have instructions for VDI and VPN. I have videos created with instruction sets, and basically everything is correct, but you see that I have that yellow highlight with the red text. The server name changed, so you just take that red text and where they tell you what server to go to, because it used to be viewstudent.gtc.edu and now it's cirrus.gtc.edu. You only need the VPN connection if you're off campus. If you're on campus, you can omit it. But if you're off campus, you must use it. And what that allows you to do, and I'm going to just log into it really quick just so you guys can see it. You bring up this piece of software. Oh, how do you like that? All right. I guess I'm not demonstrating it because I'm not going to reboot right now in the middle of a recording. But that is fascinating, and I'm wondering, try it one more time. Okay, now it works. All right, so at first you don't succeed, right? So you would connect to cirrus.gtc.edu. You'll log in with your credentials. You guys put in your ID number and your password just like you do for email and just about everything else. And then once you're logged in, you see access to the VDIs that you're able to see. For some people it's many, depending on what program you're in. For us, we're interested in IT Web Student VDI. It's a Windows 7 environment that's preloaded with all the software you might need for the web program. We are in the process of putting in a request to update it to Visual Studio 2017. Currently, Visual Studio 2013 is loaded on it, which will be
VMware client, downloadable link on that resources page.
Within the instruction set it is. You can actually download it directly from VMware.
Is it new? I have one like a year ago.
It'll be fine.
Same.
Yeah. I mean, basically it's just a client that loads up a VDI. And just in case you guys are curious, VDI stands for Virtual Desktop Interface. It's just an image of a Windows machine that's running on our server that you can access. I have some students, and I know there's a couple of you, I'm looking at John because I know you were trying to do Ruby on Rails that way, that have done all their work through the VDI because they have really bad equipment at home and they can load the client and can make a connection and run the software when their machine's not capable of running it. So if you have a machine where it takes you like 5 minutes to load Visual Studio, it'll run a lot better if you load up the VDI and run Visual Studio through that. And I'm just giving that as advice. So my thought here is for people with bad equipment and for Mac users that are struggling. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. One word of caution using the VDI though, folks. Files do not persist. However, if you go into the file manager in the VDI, there's actually a link. Every student that's got a VDI account also has a network drive. You can save stuff to your network drive, but usually I'm not a big fan of that either. What I would do is just log into my Google Drive through the VDI and then just move the folders in and out. Okay, so sorry to belittle you with that. But here we are, empty website. What's our next instruction? Click OK. You don't have that. All right, I'll tell you what. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for a second and come and help you. Okay, we took a short pause here in class to figure out some installation issues for people, and then only to discover that because 2015 Visual Studio and 2017 look very, very similar, but the 2017 version omits from the file menu the option for new website. So I'm going to kind of walk through this again, just to make sure that we're clear. If you're using versions of Visual Studio that are older than Visual Studio 2017, this is actually the steps you're going to follow. You are going to go to File, New, and then choose, instead of Project, you're going to choose New Website. And that's where you're going to find the stuff that you need. If you're running 2017, they've omitted that from the menus. So if you're running 2017, then the steps will be the ones that I've been showing you. So Visual C# on the left, website. You got to actually click on website though, because if you click on web, notice that it doesn't give you all of it. You have to actually go in, and then what we're going to be looking for is ASP.NET empty website. If you're running 2015 or earlier, it's going to be File, New Website. And then you'll be able to see this. If you choose Project using one of those older versions, you will not see this as an option. Okay, so I'm hoping that clears up problems for people as a whole. So let's go back to the instructions here. And the other thing I want you to notice here is it says in the Target Framework drop-down list, and that's this little box right up here in the middle of the dialog. You see my mouse down here. That selects, which version of the .NET framework we're using to build the application. For the most part, we really shouldn't have to worry about changing it, but one way that you can also sometimes make certain templates appear and disappear are by choosing different versions here. So in 2017, the default framework is 4.6.1. In the older versions, they are running 4.5, but you can see that incrementally over time they've added versions, and those versions match up both with versions of Windows and versions of Visual Studio. I see no reason to change away from whatever the product brings up by default unless you are not seeing the template that you want. If you are seeing the template that you want, you shouldn't really have to mess with that. We okay with that? Okay. So I'm just going with whatever it says. Next instruction. All right, we did all this. We chose empty website. And, okay, it says in the web location drop-down list, make sure file system is selected. So where is that? Do you see that on the screen? Yeah, it looks different from the book. Is that a reason to freak out? Yeah, some people say yes. All right, let me explain what this is about. If you were using the older versions, you actually had the capability with this product to directly publish your website via FTP. So when you were saving it and you were interacting with the file system, it was going directly to the server. And actually, if you were running one of these, you could click on that and you could select from one of the options. You're noticing now, though, here, that is not an option. And really, actually, that's an intelligent thing that they did in the interface, because how many developers are moving files directly? Like, you're working on the thing live, you hit save, and it's on the server? That's not usually what you want to do. There's scenarios where that can be helpful, but typically no. Okay, so that's why it's not included here. All right. Notice that they found the right location to store this. So that's what the other thing that you should select here is make sure that you're pointing to the right location. So now I created it in my Google Drive, in my folder for this class, and then I have the beginning ASP.NET folder, and there's the site folder, and then I'm selecting it. I hope I didn't do that too quickly. Next instruction is basically click OK. All right, so I'll click OK. Now, how quickly this process happens really kind of depends on how much RAM you have, the speed of your processor, your drives, etc. Yes, it can take a little while. I've seen some people's machines, especially if they're running older machines with not a lot of RAM on them, it can take a minute or two, so be patient with it. All right, so here we have an empty website project created. It's pretty exciting. That was the first exercise. Took us a while to get there, but you know what, folks, these are our initial steps, and once we get past these, we'll get rolling. So, all right, then it goes through and he starts explaining all the different types of things here that are going on. So one thing that he does is he says, well, go ahead and look at the folder where you're creating this. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the folder, and I'm going to look inside here, and I can see that it created a folder for the site. And then inside there, I can see the actual files. Notice that there's an SLN file right in the root. An SLN file is a solution file. It contains basically a collection of pointers to all the project resources. And then there's a folder inside there that says website 1. And then we can see the web config file that he's showing us here. Now, why these other files are showing up is because, well, version differences for one thing. But notice that there's packages config, web config, the debug file, and then there's a bin folder. And then if you start digging into this stuff, you're going to see, like, holy cow, right? No wonder it took a while, right? And really what this is telling you is it's building a whole collection of resources that are necessary to power a website like this. This is not like your static HTML site anymore, folks, right? It can be as simple as that, honestly, but when you're doing .NET, there's so many more capabilities, and in order to enable those capabilities, it pulls in a whole bunch of resources that need to be present to make the project work. Simple as that, and I'll say no more about it for now. All right. Now, notice how he goes through the whole thing. If you don't see the file extension, you have to learn how to turn them on, right? And I think he does that in a later exercise. The other thing that you can do is if you're looking to actually open up a website that already exists, he shows you how to do that. So you can actually, and what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm actually going to close this solution. You don't have to do that at this point. But if you were looking to open one, notice that there is an open website option. And really all that does is it wants you to point to the folder where the project is located, and it will take on the rest from there. So I'm trying to find an efficient way to get to my stuff, right? Knowing that it's on the D drive. That's not normally where Google Drive goes. So here I am, like, navigating to my folder. So this is, why file management is important. And now I can say open, and then it'll open up the website. So once you have the project going, and when we're in workflow mode, and really most of the time we're just going to be building on the same project through this course, that's what you're going to be doing. Instead of creating a new one, you're just going into the folder and opening it. But that's how you do it. Can you open a website that was created using standard HTML?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you have like a pre-existing site that you created for like Web 1, for example, sure. And I'm just going to do that just for the sake of it here. See if I even have anything interesting. Oh, sure. Maybe let's choose this one here. So I can open up a pre-existing standard HTML project in here and work on it. And yes, I can click on my index.html, it brings up the code, and I can start to type.
What am I supposed to use for the server?
All right, so now you guys get the basic gist of that. I'm going to go ahead and close this solution and jump back over to the book. All right. There's a whole bunch of different types of things that we can do when we're working with the website. And this is we're going to do this as an exercise, but you're going to see when you're working with an ASP.NET website and you start being able to add different types of files to a project, you're going to start to encounter, it's like, wow, I figured I could add a CSS file, I figured I could add a JavaScript file, I figured I could add, okay, ASP file, but really you got all these other different types of resources that you can add, and it's a pretty rich set of tools. That's one of the reasons people use .NET. And a lot of these will be pre-configured templates for creating certain types of things. So depending on the kind of work you're going to do, you would choose different types of assets, and we will demonstrate that. Now, in terms of the types of files that we work with and then the file extensions that match up with them, and this is pretty useful information. In the old days of ASP, when it was just a scripting language, the file extension for the pages was ASP. When they moved it into .NET, which is in the early 2000s, that's when we saw the X being added. That's right around the same time Microsoft Office started doing the same thing. And if you're curious about what the X means, the X actually stands for XML. Because a lot of these technologies, and I think you guys were learning this in the other class too, that the parent language for all markup languages is XML, and Microsoft made the switch for most of their file formats to use that as a basis for creating their files, and thus the addition of the X. So when we are generating new ASP.NET pages, they will typically have an ASPX extension. Yes, you can still create HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, and whatever, but notice all the different types of file extensions. I'm not expecting you to memorize them yet, you know, and maybe ever, really, because you can always Google them, right? But notice some of the ones that we will be working with are all the ones that you see here. So initially we'll be looking at ASPX, we'll be working with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We already saw the web config file. We didn't really dig into it and look at what's in there, but that does contain configuration information. But notice that you can have sitemap files, you can have skins. Yes, you can skin your websites, folks. That's a cool thing about ASP.NET. And there is a cool little exercise that we do in this book where we create the website, and it's got one look, and then we create a theme, which is basically a skin, and then we create a little switcher for it, and we can go from like a dark theme to a light theme with completely different CSS with the flick of a little drop down. Pretty easy to do in this environment. Other thing you see is a web user control, and that basically is where we can create like a thing that we put on a page that does something. Okay, and it could be really a whole bunch of different things, but we create like a tool, and once you create a cool little tool, it's really nice to be able to save it as a separate file. And then once you've created it once, like you create, let's say, like a form or some sort of fancy control that does something, you can pull it into any project you want. So you create reusability in the process. So a bunch of different file types. And right now, we're going to start adding some files to the site. So let's go ahead and follow the next steps. Now, I went ahead and closed my projects. If you guys actually listened to what I said earlier in the video, you left yours open. But if you need to open it now, because you closed it, follow my steps, okay? So I'm going to go back to File, Open, and then I also want you to realize that you can come down here to Recent Projects and Solutions. So I should be able to find the site I was working on. In fact, it was right here. So I could click that and it would open up. But I want you to know how to navigate too. So I'm going to go to Open Website. And then I'm going to navigate to my ASP.NET folder, begin ASP.NET, and go to Site. That's where I'm going to be doing all my work. I'm just going to click Open, and there it is. Is that right? Not quite. Yeah, it's not quite right. So what happened is when I created it, it created a folder inside of a folder. So I'm actually going to go ahead and close this. And I'm like having all these thoughts about how I'm going to fix this already in my head. You guys want to know how I'm going to fix it? You got it. You're going to delete the damn thing and start over again. And actually, I'm not even going to delete it. I'm just going to go ahead and... Well, actually, I am. Okay, goodbye. All right, so here we go. We start all over again from scratch. No harm done. No harm, no foul. Project. empty site. And here's what got me the last time. You see this little option that I'm hovering over right now where it says create directory for solution, and quite frankly, the instructions, I may have glossed over the spot where it maybe told me to uncheck that. I don't know. I'm not really sure. But I am going to put my site here in site. Oh, and I know what the problem is. You want to know what the problem is? Watch this. I'm going to go back here, and I'm actually going to go into my folder, and I'm going to delete the site folder. Oops. Not shortcut. You got to be careful how you right click. Okay, so I'm getting rid of that. I'm going to cancel out the box again. I just want to refresh it. So new project, and then I'm actually going to call it and see, it's not finding the folder, so it's putting me somewhere else completely different. So now I'm landing in the begin ASP.NET folder, so I'm selecting that folder, and then I'm going to name it site. See? Tricky. I am not going to create a directory for the solution. That's just a personal option. And one of the reasons I do that is I'm not creating a project that's going to have multiple websites working together. It's just going to be one website. When I click that box, what it does is it creates a solution file inside the folder and then another folder for the files. I don't want that right now. Too complicated for a simple website project. So I'm unchecking it. What that means is it's going to put that solution file in the same folder with all the website files. All right, being brave and clicking OK. So now I'm starting from scratch. And now if I go back and I look in my file folder window, which I have closed, I shouldn't have, I can go to my Google Drive, my .NET, begin ASP.NET, and there's the site folder now. Hopefully you guys got the same thing. I look inside there, I can see the stuff it pre-created, and then on top of it, I can also see the solution file right in the root. Now, if you're like some of the people in class, or I'm really thinking of one in particular who went ahead and hit the play button at this point, it's not going to do anything, right? Isn't that correct, Tom?
No, it won't.
Just won't do anything. So you don't want to hit that play button yet. Follow the instructions. All right. Now we're going to go over and create a new folder. All right, so notice what we're going to do. We're going to right-click the site, and I'm going to show you what they mean by that. Right up here at the top, you can see that it's got a little asset called site. This is the project root, and this is where I'm going to add something. Okay, so at the root of the project, once again, I'm going to right-click, and then I'm going to choose add. And this little step, this like right-click, yeah, there's a dialogue that pops up. I see that look on your face. Right? Let me just repeat that. So you right-click on the project root, and you know it's a project root because see how it's like bold? It's bold text compared to the rest. And then I'm going to click add, and they want us to add a new folder. And if I remember right, they want us to call it master pages. Notice capital M, capital P. When you guys were learning your standard HTML, now I changed screen so I have to retype it. You learned, hey, you should probably name all your stuff lowercase, right? You guys learned that as a convention? Welcome to the Microsoft world. They want everything to start with a capital letter. Okay?
And it's not case sensitive, so you can type it uppercase or lowercase, and it doesn't matter.
I'm going to caution you on saying that, Tom. Actually, in this environment, it does. It doesn't. Tom's telling me that it's not case sensitive. We'll see.
I mean, it depends on if you're...
All right, so hopefully you were able to do that. Create a master page folder. All right. The next thing it says, right-click this new folder and choose Add New Item, or you can go to the File menu and choose Add New Item from there. But what I think is easier is to just do it with a right-click on the folder directly. And it says in the dialog box that appears, click Master Page as the item type. So here we are on the master pages. You just do a right-click, Add New Item. And then what you're going to locate is Master Page. And of course, you know, since you're in this dialog box, before you get click happy and just click Add, not a bad idea to take a little time to start exploring. We will repeat this process many times, so you'll get it over time. But look at the kind of stuff you can add. Wow, well, I guess I can add an HTML page or JavaScript or style sheet or web form, yada, 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 yada. I can add all that stuff with the right click of the mouse. And yes, it does pre-build it to a certain extent. So if I chose an HTML page, you can count on the fact that it would probably have a doc type on it, and a head and a body and HTML and all that already included. So it does some of the work for you. I don't know if he wants us to change the name of it. He wants us to change it to front end with a capital F, so let's do that. And then I also...
I didn't say that because I'm thinking it's a bad way to name your folder or anything.
So the one thing I do also want to have you pay attention to is this little switch right here. And notice how it says place code in separate file. All right. Now, what does the book tell us to do here? Does it tell us?
To have that checked.
Okay, to make sure that it's checked, because that's really the best way to do it. There's a couple of times, I think, where the author decides to tell us to not do that to demonstrate the effect.
So we do inline code and then it says.
Okay. So it's the next exercise? All right. Thank you for spoiling it for us. All right. But this is usually what I call the best option. And what this is referring to, if you guys are curious, we are going to be writing what is a combination of ASP, or not PHP, but HTML stuff in a file. And then what we're doing here is we're doing this technique called code behind, where we have a server-side language, which is going to be C#, that we could either put directly into the document that we're working with, or link it to the document and put it in a separate file, which is usually considered the best practice to separate those concerns. So this is what it's going to do. So when I click this Add button, you're going to notice over here that it builds the front-end master, but notice how the front-end master has a little expando thing on it, and it creates a separate file with the same name and an additional file extension, which is .cs, which stands for C#. If we were working in Visual Basic, which maybe you've selected by mistake, yeah, and it happens, it's not a big deal, then that file extension will be .vb. Okay? And then that indicates what language it is. Yes, I can click on the front-end master and it opened automatically, and what do we see inside here? We see an HTML document. Okay? But notice that the very first line creates some code that's a little bit different. And since we're at this point, I want to also show you a Visual Studio setting that you're going to want to turn on. Can you guys notice that I have a horizontal scroll bar here, which is not very useful because I want to see all the code on the screen. So I'm going to turn on Visual Studio's feature for doing word wrap, and I'll show you how to do that because it's a little complicated. So go to your Tools menu, and then go to Options. And then what we're looking for is, on the left-hand side, we want to go to Text Editor, expand that, and then click on General. Not General, okay, All Languages, excuse me. And then notice right here how word wrap, it doesn't have a check mark, it has a box, which means it's active for some and not active for others. I would encourage you to switch it to a check mark. And then the option that comes below it, it says show visual glyphs for word wrap. That's up to you, but basically what that means, if it is word wrapping, you can have it put a little like curly arrow on it that shows you that it's word wrapping, so you're not mistaking the fact that it actually would be going off the side of the screen. I like that on, so I'm gonna trigger it. The other thing that you might consider if it's not available is line numbers. In this mode, you see we do already have line numbers, but I kind of like to force them in, because that way when you're working on code and you get an error from the debugger and it says line 39, position 10, you know where line 39 is. You don't want to be sitting there counting, the lines. It's kind of cumbersome.
Where's that? Options?
You go to Tools, Options, and then in the left sidebar, go down to Text Editor, and then choose All Languages. Once you've made those selections, please go ahead and choose OK. And then watch what happens to my screen as I click that. See the little visual glyph right here? Little pointed arrow. And now the line does not go off to the side of the screen. I think that's a good way to work. Now, if you are working in a single screen environment, which a lot of us don't have second screens, right? And you're trying to put like your book on the screen at the same time, you're trying to squeeze a bunch of stuff in there, things get crowded. So having that word wrap turned on when you're doing this type of thing really becomes helpful. When you start taking Visual Studio and you start minimizing it so you can see your code. I would encourage you though, even if you're working on a laptop, that you might want to consider when you're doing this type of work, that you consider having a second monitor. I'm not saying rush out to Best Buy and buy one for a couple $100. I'm saying walk into Goodwill and find some junky old flat screen for like $15 or $10 that you can just plug in on the side and have a little extra workspace and just throw your PDF over there of the book, or you can actually start to take some of these components, and we haven't talked about customizing Visual Studio, but any of the little things that are in boxes on the screen you can pick up, move, and put them somewhere else. And what a lot of professional developers do is they end up taking their main window and putting their code there only, and then they take like their Solution Explorer and the Properties windows and move them over to the second screen, and then they might have a file window open there, and then they might even have a third screen where they have the browser, so if they're working, so they can see all the stuff at the same time. Seems kind of ridiculous, and I know my wife, she comes down into my workspace, she goes, "Do you really need that many screens?" And I'm like, "Yes, dear." And then she doesn't get it until she watches me work. And then when she sees the process of it, that I don't have to like sit there and like flip and like lose my spot. Everything's all up on the screen at the same time. It's kind of like when you're working with paper and you have a big desk, you can lay all the paper out at the same time and look at all of it. You don't have to shuffle anything. So that's just a piece of advice. All right. So we completed that process, and now the author once again is talking about some new file extensions, and we did talk about these to some degree. The one that's really most pertinent to us, at least right now, are the ones in the middle, which are, notice what kind of files they are. They're class files. And the reason they're class files is because those are the files that hold the programming code, and Visual Basic and C#, the language we're using, are both object-oriented programming languages. And then think back to when you took your Java 1 class. What are your code files called? They're class files, right? So whenever you're creating a program, you're creating a class. And it's the same thing when you're working with Visual Basic or C#. You're creating a class file with programming code. We're not there yet, but just so you know the file extensions.
Do they compile the same way? Halfway?
They do compile roughly the same way because you're still using the .NET framework. That's an excellent question. So we're using the same .NET frameworks that we use to generate full-blown applications, and that's why this language requires a server to operate.
So it doesn't fully compile to a runtime?
Exactly. Those are really good questions, Tom. In fact, there are ways where you can like pre-compile things. In fact, when you take the application, you push it to a server, the proper way to do it is you put it on a Windows server and convert it into an application on the server that is pre-compiled so it runs faster. I mean, that's the best practice. All right. If you guys are giving me a look on that, it's because maybe you don't understand those things yet, but it's just good information to know. Now, some additional file types that you'll encounter as you work in these environments are XML files, and you guys, I think, maybe have a little bit of a basis for that. XML being the parent language for all markup languages, right? But it's also a format for storing data. So it can be used for database type of information. Then you have your more standard database files that you see, the MDF files. And then you also have these entity data models. And if you guys are familiar with working with databases, you probably have heard about these types of files. But basically, these are part of this entity framework, and that really is a pretty advanced skill. That's not something we get to in this class, unfortunately, because we usually don't have enough time. But .NET 2, we do get up to that point. All right. Another thing that you can do is you don't actually have to create files directly within this environment. If I have something that I already created that I want to add in, believe it or not, I can just drag and drop it in from the file window, or Control-C copy from a file window and paste it into the project. Or, and what the author does is demonstrate a couple different techniques here. So it says, in Windows, minimize all open applications, right-click your desktop, choose New Text Document. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm going to do an easy way to do that, folks. Great shortcut key. Hold on your Windows key and press the letter D. Everything's minimized. That's $1 million tip right there. I didn't know that one. It always surprises me, like I know all these keyboard shortcuts that people don't know them. And so I love sharing them. And then if you want to bring everything back, you can do Windows key D once again to bring it back. All right. So what they want us to do is right here on the desktop is right-click, go to New, and create a new text document. Right? And what do they want us to call it? Styles.css. Yes, I want to change it. Now, going back to the earlier part of the video where I had you guys turn on file extensions, that wasn't a mistake. I did it preemptively of getting to this point. All Windows machines out of the box, by default, obscure the file extensions. So you'll create a file and call it styles.css, and then when you actually pull it into the project, like he's indicating in the book, you're going to find out that it's named styles.css.text. Now I'm also noticing that I'm using my static HTML conventions where I start with a lowercase s, but here, what are they using here? Uppercase. All right, so guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to the desktop here. I'm going to right-click, rename, and change that S to a capital S. Okay. Next thing he wants us to do is get it so that we can see Visual Studio and see the file at the same time, and then just drag and drop it in. All right, I think that's what he's telling us to do, and if not, well, read what he's saying and do it that way then.
Where is this file coming from?
We just created it on the desktop. Now, I can just literally bring it in and drop it in anywhere. Now the question is, did he have a location for us to drop it to? Right? Click the CSS file on the desktop by holding the mouse button, drag the like you need to know how to drag and drop, you guys? Okay, hopefully not. All right, and drag it in, and then it'll put it in the Solution Explorer. All right, so let's just go ahead and do that. He's not being picky about where it goes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that file, and I'm going to drop it. I could drop it in any one of these folders. Where I am going to drop it, though, is directly on the site folder, and then that puts it in the root. So it is a possibility you have pre-existing files. Yes, you can bring them right in. And that's just one way to bring a file into the project. Just drag.
Did you put it in the master folder?
No, I put it. I dropped it onto the root of the site.
Oh, the globe?
Yep. Now the question that I usually get from people is when I drag and drop that in, is it now linking to my desktop where I created it? Or did it take the file and put it in the project?
It copied it.
It copied it. Very good. So it intelligently made a copy of it. So, and the thinking there, I think, is that you can pull something in from another project and not ruin the other project and make a copy into your own. Okay, with the completion of this step, we're going to be taking a break here in the classroom, and this video will end here, and I will record a second video to follow up.